Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Pretty cool.
Turned out to be a beautiful day to live in Winona County.
That new? New
Winona
slogan?
County, new slogan? No, it's a very tried and true slogan. An old retailer told me that one time. Always have a slogan. Public comment. We start our meetings out with public comment. Step to the podium, 2 minutes, and your name and address, please.
Don Evanson, 16233 Denzer Road, Minnesota City. I'm on the Planning Commission, you likely know, and I'm here tonight because I'm aware of the IUP, the Interim Use Permit proposal, and I'd like to speak against that. My understanding is that this developed because a commissioner or two had concerns about the family night on the farm issue and permitting for that. I think that if we're overreaching, if we have significant concerns with the Chamber of Commerce rotating a family night on the farm in the county, and that's just too much government. We can figure out how to do that without developing a new layer of ordinance control. State statute allows you to adopt the IUPs. The language is may, it is not shall. And we heard from one member of the Planning Commission that all the counties around the state are adopting this. I think that's false. I think there's a handful out of the 87 counties that have. Winona County should take the lead in opposing such expansion of ordinance, and hopefully you will not go along this route. There's a couple of issues with it. Started out as a minor concern. Staff came back with the legal assistance, etc., and gave us this full-blown proposal for an IUP. It unnecessarily bulks up our ordinance and complicates it. It egregiously, in a couple of instances, deprives property owners of some rights that should be respected and honored. I think later on in your discussion, some commissioners will address those concerns. Hopefully so. I think that's enough said. Please carefully consider this. Don't bulk up and complicate. Oh, let me back up. We have heard that there's an opinion from an attorney general that dates back about 20 years that dates on a conditional use permit, termination dates, cannot be enforced. Well, when we asked to see some case law to that effect, there is none developed over those 20 years since this opinion arose. So I propose that the county continue with as it has since 1971, with putting dates on conditional use permits as the Planning Commission and the board decides, with attached conditions, and continue to act in that manner. If someday it is challenged with some case law, then we can react to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to address the county board? Anyone else? All right, seeing nobody, we'll move on to item 5, approval of the county board minutes from October 9th, 2018.
Point of order, did we close session?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, we did not.
Close session.
Second.
Okay, all right, thank you. We did not. So we have a motion made by Commissioner Jacob, seconded by Commissioner Olson to close the closed session. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, thank you for that point of correction. Now, item 5, approval of the county board minutes from October 9th.
I move to approve. Sorry.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Pomeroy, second by Commissioner Jacob to approve the meeting minutes from October 9th. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Approved. Item 6, there are no committee meeting minutes. Item 7, consent comments and approval of the agenda. Commissioner, no, Mr. Fritz?
No.
Okay, Commissioner Kvesi?
Nothing.
Pomeroy, Olson? Commissioner Jacob.
I'd like to pull item 8.1.
Okay, pull 8.1, and we will make that 9.0. That works. And
I move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
okay, we have I do have one announcement, okay? That's fine. Motion by Commissioner Pomeroy, second by Commissioner Kavesi to approve the amended agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Approved. Mr. Fritz, if you read the department recommendations.
Okay, so item 8.1 was pulled. Department recommendations 8.2, accept gift of money for K-9 unit. 8.3, approve even trade of donated veterans transport vans for a pickup and use of donated funds from veterans clubs for purchase of Tommy lift to support veterans equipment needs. 8.4, approve monthly resolution. 8.5, approve donations received from 7/1/2018 to 9/30/2018. 8.6, approve University of Minnesota Extension Memorandum of Agreement for service through 2021. 8.7, confirm payment of disbursements. 8.8, approve proposed insurance changes for life, long-term disability, vision, and dental.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Pomeroy, second by Commissioner Olson to approve the consent agenda items. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Approved. All right. Then going back to 8.1, the adopt interim use permits into Winona County zoning ordinance, chapter 5.5. Starts on page 129 of our packet. Commissioner Jacob.
Yeah, so Planning Commission had extensive discussion in a public hearing on the interim use permit, and a couple of my concerns all along were, well, first of all, there certainly are reasons where an interim use permit could be useful. It was already brought up about family night on the farm. It could be, somebody wants to have a concert, or, it's really not necessary for them to have a conditional use permit. So there's reason definitely to consider an interim use permit. Where things got hard for me to put the pieces together on were in the event of something like a concrete plant, sometimes temporary, the person might need it to service I-90, but they also might want to develop a permanent business, and they may want a conditional use permit. Along those lines, solar facility, wind generation, could go either way. Sand mine, rock quarry, same thing. They might feel like I could get my permit better if the community knew that it wasn't going to be forever and there's going to be an end date on it. But at the same time, they might want to come in and apply for a permanent use for that property. So my discussions were that if they could come in and apply for what they wanted, giving the citizen the power to either have it be a conditional use or an interim use, but I would support it. And in the end, and initially I think it was determined that that would be possible, but then the way it was finalized, that wouldn't be possible. Is that how I understand it?
Well, if I could back up to the couple slides, it probably would be useful to help to answer that question, Commissioner, if I could be permitted to do so.
The slides that were provided in our packet.
Yes.
Sure. That brings
Heidi,
clarity.
Can you bring those up? Okay, I submitted them.
Can you find them, Heidi?
It's page 130 or something like that.
Here, we can go ahead.
I'll pull it
We've
up.
got them in our packet. Which slide are you referring to?
The beginning. Hang on, 1 second. Heidi's bringing him up. Thanks for the momentary delay here. So I want to answer Commissioner Jacobs' question. The process with the IUP, it was only a list from the county board of things to work on in the department. And we started out looking and surveying what other counties were doing. Both Assistant County Attorney Nuttall and I were at conferences. 45 people from different counties raised their hands that they already had IUPs. Some could have been 2 from one county. Lou, I think you did a survey of.
I did a quick Google search, just trying to find. There's not a database of how many counties have actually adopted IUPs. They don't collect that data. But I did a Google search and found reference to IUPs in like 30-some counties around the state.
So to get back to the question asked by the commissioner, we did look at a couple of different approaches done by various counties that were similar in size to us. Houston County being one of them, and we can talk about that too if you should so choose. Several of them had specific lists of things that were only allowed for IUPs. Our zoning ordinance has a list of items that can be CUPs, so that list would stay the same as it is in the final iteration from the Planning Commission. Other counties had a combined form that was IUP-CUP, that the petitioner could apply for what they wanted. They might have a box to check that says it's a temporary use, or that, again, the hot mix plant might end when the highway project is finished, which might steer it toward an ending date. So after several meetings where we had discussions and sort of information gathering, we settled on the latter model, as Commissioner Jacob indicated, as what the group seemed to be going toward, and that's what it was eventually approved. So basically, if someone applies for an IUP or a CUP on the same application, same amount of staff time and everything, it's up to ultimately the county board to decide whether they're issuing an IUP or a CUP. So they could issue an IUP for that hot mix plant that was going to expire in a year because they were told that's all we need. But maybe that person is here for a year and says, gosh, I'd love to live here and do this, and I'm going to reapply for an IUP, or I'm going to reapply, and this time I'm going to have it be a CUP. So there is flexibility in the design of this particular recommendation of a CUP IUP application. And then it in fact came up at the last Planning Commission meeting last Thursday, where there could have been a possibility of using something like this should the Planning Commission so have chosen, and the board subsequently supported for a situation that was actually tabled. So it's another tool in the toolbox that other counties are utilizing, and we certainly wouldn't want to preclude our ability to use that as an option if it seems suitable for a particular project, business, or something that's time limited. Do you have other things to add or other questions?
Commissioner Jacob.
So I think I must still not be fully understanding. The applicant comes in, so let's just say rock quarry. Does the planning department look at it and decide, who decides whether it's a IUP or CUP?
The county board, just like they decide whether or not to approve a CUP at this point. That comes to them from the Planning Commission.
I think that backing up the, like at the counter from when somebody comes in to our offices and brings a proposal, we would talk to them about what they're proposing. We let them know how our ordinance is set up, how conditional, how it fits into the conditional use lists that are there. We've got 30-some listed conditional uses, so if it fits in under that, we talk with them about that, and what the duration of the project was. How many, same with a normal one, how many employees they might be looking at, what's the area that they're looking at, what's the time frame, what's their layout for their business plan, how does it all fit into our ordinance, and then we'd have that discussion with them. If it was something that was temporary, we might talk to them about interim use permits. Ultimately, it would be up to them to decide what they apply for. We would then package it and analyze it, and put together a staff report. We could potentially at that time they could be applying for a conditional use permit. We might disagree and think that it might be better as an IUP for this, and this reason. But ultimately, that would be presented to the Planning Commission with all that information. The applicant would be able to state what and why what they're applying for and why, and we'd be able to present our information as far as staff analysis goes. So then, Planning Commission makes the recommendation, County Board approves.
Okay, so very initially, early on in the discussions, the planning department themselves were going to create a list of either or, right?
And that was, as I alluded to, because that was what other counties had done. They seemed to have one model where it was an IUP-CUP application, and it worked its way through for the determination of which. And then the other format was where specific IUP functions were called out, such as an Airbnb license or a temporary secondary dwelling for the use of migrant farm help or something like that. But we didn't end up going that direction based on discussions.
Okay, so for some reason I think I got I became under the
Slide, please.
that is how we ended up. That's all. Okay, all right. But okay, so still, whether you say we come to give the final decision to the county board, I feel like the power should be in the citizens' hands. They should be able to come in and say, I want a CUP, I want an IUP. And then it's kind of like a lot of times planning commission discussions just kind of start spurring off, and they'll say, well, if you'd have put the house way over here, we could approve it, but ultimately it's that person's application, and here's where they applied to put their house, and I kind of feel like either we can approve it or we don't approve it, not up to us to fine tune it, or more than fine tune it, kind of change it from what it is. So
the current Minnesota statutes are now up. Sorry for the technical difficulties earlier. So the temporary use of property till a particular date or until a particular event occurs, such as property sold or until the zoning ordinance regulations no longer permit it. The other thing is, if something is going to only last a year or 5 years, or even if it's solar for 20 years, it could be listed as an IUP, but we can no longer put a time limiting condition on CUPs. It won't be enforceable. And unfortunately, in my tenure here, we are doing that. Those have been approved by the board. And legal has opined, I believe, that would not be enforceable potentially.
Why not? Because they agree to abide, in public testimony, they agree to abide by the conditions put forth. They sign it, it's documented, it's recorded. And again, to Commissioner Jacobs, where's the case law that says that that's the case?
There is no case law because no one has challenged this since the Attorney General's office opinion came out. The chronology of this is that I believe it was 1972 is when counties were given the authority to issue conditional use permits. I believe it was 1982. Drawing a blank on my timelines here. 82, I think, is when municipalities were given that authority, and it wasn't until 1989 that the first interim use permit statute came out. But that only applied to municipalities. And in 1990 is when the Attorney General's office issued an opinion that said, now that we have this, you can't put a time limit on a conditional use permit. And the reason is because there's some confusion about what conditions means. Everybody thinks of conditional use permit as the conditions that we put at the very end, that this permit gets issued, but you've got to do these things. And that's not really what the opinion says is the conditional use. What they're saying is those findings of fact that we're making at the beginning, the things that say the reason why we're giving you this is because you meet these conditions, that's the conditions that apply. So as long as they're meeting those things at the top in the findings of fact, then we can't really, unless there's a change of circumstances, we can't go back in and revoke that regardless of whatever we put at the end that says this is going to expire.
So you're not held to your word. So having them sign that and document it means absolutely nothing.
I've always had some concerns about that first condition that's on there, the one that says you're going to comply with everything you say you're going to do. I've always had some concerns about the enforceability of that one, and I'm hoping we're going to be working on some better language that we can have with that, because
Well, I'm sure a lawyer crafted it to begin with.
I'm sure one did, but there's various versions of that out there. And so that's always been a concern for me. It wasn't until 2008 that the IUP statute was then brought for counties, and since that time, MCIT, all the trainings, Jay Squire's training in December, Marcus Miller, who wrote the manual on land use and zoning regulation for counties, all of them are saying you can't put a time limit on a conditional use permit. You need to implement an interim use permit into your ordinance in order to be able to do the things that you've always wanted to do. But in general, the consensus seems to be that's how you have to do it, and nobody is challenging it because everybody is doing what they're following through with what the AG's office said.
So what would happen if one that was previously issued prior to interim use permits being available was challenged?
If one from prior to 2008 was challenged, I would argue that one's enforceable because the statute, there wasn't an option at that point for it. After 2008, when we have the interim use tool and we choose not to implement or use it, that's where
So
the
that's 10
enforceability
years.
would come in.
What happens with those?
In the last 10 years, potentially they're not enforceable. Somebody would have to challenge them, and there aren't that many of them, but it's,
Perhaps unenforceable in court. We'll do our best to enforce our conditions and what the applicants have stated that their intention is. But yeah, if you got to court, I mean, technically, we may be, unable to enforce that.
Commissioner Jacob.
Okay, so I know we went over this too, but until ordinance regulations no longer permit it. So,
Until the zoning regulation.
so we enact the IUP, someone comes in and gets a permit, IUP or CUP, I suppose. And then we revise the ordinance multiple times and we change it so that's no longer a legal use. Is that property then grandfathered, or is that property subject to now it's no longer permitted?
the good legal answer is it depends.
Or to the non-conforming, allowed
It would
non-conforming
be
use.
depending on how the permit was written is whether or not it would be an allowed non-conforming use. The last sentence I believe that we put in the paragraph that says the permit will specify what the grounds for the sunset would be. That means that we have to spell out either there's an event that happens, so for instance, the business is no longer in use, or the medical need for the mobile home is no longer there. We can put that in there. We can put a specific date. We can say 10 years from the issuance of this permit. Or we can say this is valid until the zoning ordinance changes. But whatever we choose to terminate that permit, that has to be spelled out. So unless it says that an ordinance change will do it, then it would be a non-conforming use at that point.
In use, in a CUP or an IUP?
No, it would only be for an IUP because an IUP is the only one that can terminate.
Okay, so if you give someone a CUP and you change the ordinance and make that use not legal, they're still.
Same as it is today.
So it seems like they have a lot better rights with the CUP than they do with the IUP. Because someone could get a majority on the board, say, okay, I don't like that business, whatever it is, a quarry. I'm going to get a majority on the board, and I get a majority. Now we change the zoning regulations, and if that person had a CUP, it's forever. Now we've changed it to political will.
But only if the interim use permit says that a zoning ordinance change would do that. My assumption, based on the discussions that we've had, both at the planning commission as well as the county board, is that it would be the rare permit that would be included.
I can't even think of a circumstance where we would do that, but I'm not saying that it may not happen.
Maybe a dairy sand.
Commissioner Jacob, to your point, a county board could also recommend that the current list of CUPs be expanded or shrunk as well. And that's the list that you can get CUPs or IUPs
But anyone who has a CUP, at this point, there's nothing that can happen on a change of the county board or in the ordinance that can take that away from them, right?
Not exactly. A CUP could be revoked.
Well, for noncompliance.
For fairly egregious noncompliance, we certainly wouldn't take that lightly. So just, now we have a larger version up on the screen. So the CUP runs with the land regardless of ownership. The use is allowed in perpetuity. Conditions can be attached, but not an ending date, which we are currently doing. So the IUP, as a tool for the Planning Commission, the board, and staff, has a certain end date. You can reapply. You can reapply for an IUP for a different time length. You could apply for a CUP instead when the IUP expires. The use is temporary, even if it's 5 years. We had a lot of discussion about that as well. And conditions can be attached, including an end date. So as a tool in the toolbox for the Planning Commission, the board, and staff, it will remove the current practice of adding time limitations to CUPs.
Can we modify this to eliminate the until zoning ordinance regulations no longer permit it? Okay, I mean, that would make me feel
Where are you, Commissioner, what page are you reading? I remember reading that.
That language is the consistent language with what's included in
132.
statute.
It's consistent?
It's word for word out of statute.
Oh, okay. Mr. Jacobs.
What would be the third point in these round ones here?
The three criteria, that's what's it's provided for in statute. That's why it's included in what's before you.
Okay.
So that would, this version gives us consistency with 394.303 interim use permits for counties.
So-
394 being the county chapter for state statute.
I feel like there's all great intentions here. My concern is 5-10 years, a different board, different planning director, different county attorney, different planning staff. The memories of how this was assembled and looking at the language, they're going to be like, oh, here's the way to terminate that, where the person thought they came in and were getting something into as long as they wanted it, and then there's some way to circumvent it with changing the ordinance and a whole new set of people not having the same understanding that this set of
But
people
it'd
have.
still be a non-conforming allowable CUP. They'd still have that CUP, and it would be just a non-conforming.
If they had the CUP,
Correct.
goes with land. If they had an IUP, that ends.
But of course, somebody who has an IUP that is ending can apply for a CUP or an extension of an IUP with a
At
different
what
timeline.
cost?
At cost and no guarantee, and they have to go through the political pain again.
The Planning Commission would have to be gone through again, and the fee for the staff report, which is minimal.
Well, part of the goal, my original intention was somehow to minimize, I mean, we haven't minimized anything. We've just made it probably even more complicated because I'm sitting here thinking, who in their right mind would want an IUP unless it's definitely a defined, because you talk about a business. Well, if I have a business on my property and I have an IUP, then that value of that business, if I decide to sell or move, is virtually gone. So I wouldn't want an IUP.
You wouldn't have to have one necessarily.
Well, but there's, I don't feel, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Kavesi, you had your light on, but all this zoning ordinance doesn't seem to be consumer friendly. We use a lot, it has a negative, in my opinion, it has a negative tone from the get-go. And it's not, how can I help you achieve the goals that you want to do? It's, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you got to do this. We're going to tell you how to do this and that within our zoning rules. And I know we got a lot of rules and everything, but it doesn't have a customer service feel to me. Because like we say there, zoning no longer permitted. There's a couple other very kind of just negative things that staff, and yes, staff influences these greatly because you drop these conditions, these facts of finding, they are, I don't know if they're always, you sit down with the applicant and come up with these things, or do you sit down as staff and come up with these things? It just doesn't feel as customer friendly to me as zoning and planning should be. I get a negative vibe when I talk about all these termination and best interest and issuance and required and I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting, but it just doesn't feel like, yes, Mr. Customer, Mr. Taxpayer, how can we help you achieve your goals? it's like.
Madam Chair, if
I got Commissioner Kavesi.
Okay.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Please, you can respond to.
Oh, I just wanted to assure both Madam Chair and the commissioners that the customer service level from the Planning and Environmental Services Department is identical, whether somebody comes in for an IUP or CUP. In fact, we get regular compliments on the swiftness with which and I guess thoroughness with which we process applications and try to make the process as much the unclenched fist of government as possible. And that's something that I feel that staff does an outstanding job of, and we would certainly not let standards slack if we had the additional tool of the IUP for all parties involved.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Yeah, I think some of that is the nature of zoning regulations. They
And I've
are
never
zoning
liked it.
regulations. Well, there's a reason for zoning regulations, but my question had to deal more with process, so I don't know if we're ready for that or not. But I understand you say the customer comes in at the counter and you talk together and work out some things, and then the customer decides if they want a CUP or an IUP, and the fee is the same.
No, I think that's not what you said.
Yeah, I mean, they come in, they present what they are wanting to do.
But didn't you say then that you tell them that the county board decides whether they get an IUP or CUP?
Well, that's later in the process. That's what they decide at that point
They
in the
can
process.
request, it's the same application form. The idea is that it would be one form for a CUP/IUP.
Right, and
Based on what's included in that, kind of dictates what would be an appropriate interim or conditional
But the
use.
customer decides that.
They would,
customer
they get
decides
to check the box and say, I would like to ask for a temporary
Right.
or a permanent.
and then it goes through the whole process. Goes through the whole process. Goes through the whole process where staff prepares the report, and it comes before the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission can review it and say, can they say at that point, I think this, we can recommend this, but you may want to change it to a CUP or change it one way or the other. Is it possible to change it at that point, or, but only if the customer agrees?
That was one of the things that we'd envisioned, similar to the process we do now, where the discussion leads to additional conditions being added or conditions being subtracted from the end of the permits, where there's always a discussion with the applicant, make sure they're okay with that. It would be the exact same findings that you're used to. There would be an additional finding on there that's.
That's just my opinion on it. It's
I think I
a
have a-
non-conforming use.
I have a question for council. If I make a motion, it's council.
This discussion I get to be.
Well, it's with respect to Robert's rules. If I make a motion, I think it's inappropriate for me to speak against my own motion. And I'm thinking it's the same with a second. So I feel like you seconded the motion, now you're speaking against what you seconded.
I'm not, I'm speaking in favor of it.
Okay, I thought you were saying
No,
that.
I was
it made sense.
confirming my support for your motion by saying that I don't think
Okay.
that the language that
Okay,
you
I
want
thought you
out.
meant that we should leave it in because it doesn't make a
No.
difference. Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, my suggestion is that the language really isn't all that meaningful. And as such, I don't think it's really necessary because the basic bottom line is a change in zoning regulations is going to just change it into an allowable non-conforming use in any event, whether it says it or not.
But with only that time factor. So if they wanted to renew it, that could bring it into a problematic. Can you renew a non-conforming use?
No.
No. So if you put the 5-year on your IUP and the zoning changed, you would be allowed for the 5 years, but you couldn't renew it, if we took that, you couldn't renew it.
And I think in 99% of the situations, you're talking about some things of such limited time that it's, I think we'll make it
Mountain out of
that thing.
Yeah, we don't have mountains. We
I mean,
got
if
hills.
we put it in practice, I think that's what you want.
Well, and Commissioner Olson, you had
I
something?
just, so the planning commission put forth their findings of fact in their
Page-
page page 141 of the county packet. Now, you said you weren't at that meeting?
I missed one.
Was this the meeting?
I've only missed one planning commission meeting ever.
Was this the
I
one?
don't remember
Where
this
they
being
put this
part of that
forward?
meeting, but.
September 20th.
No.
Eugene Hansen signed it?
Well, he's the
Commissioner
chairperson.
Jacob was at the meeting where this was
So
approved
it
by the
was
planning
discussed-
commission.
I think it was discussed at the planning commission, but the majority put this forth. That, okay. So, and that's why I'm not, just because this particularly meets the, or mentions the same statute, right? Or a different statute. Oh, it mentions both of them, so. Statutory language is the planning commission's recommendation, so that's just why I'm not going to support the motion.
I think it's fluffy language, but I think it's moot.
I'm ready to vote.
I think if somebody really has an issue, a legal challenge. Now, but that being said, every ordinance, every adoption change should be on a regular review. So when are we scheduled to review our zoning ordinance? And when are we scheduled to review our comprehensive land use plan? There is, I believe there's statutory language on both of those documents, correct?
The comprehensive language plan is supposed to be annually.
But I think there is statutory language.
Yeah, our plan is a 10-year plan, so it was adopted in
Is that statutory?
2014.
Is that the statutory language?
I don't think that there is statutory language as far as the actual length of your comprehensive plan.
Okay,
for
but
counties.
if we find that this is not working within the next, whatever timetable a county board can determine, it can be reviewed and changed.
It can really be reviewed and changed at any time.
Yes, okay.
But it's made to be a long-term plan.
Right, but
On
if it's
an
not
interim
working,
basis.
yeah, if it's not working,
On an interim basis.
if it's not
It's
working.
it's really not meant to be on a, changed regularly.
Right, but it can be. It can be. Don't say it can't be. It can. That's right. It can be. All right, with that understanding. Are we ready?
The zoning ordinance, FYI, the zoning ordinance has been getting reviewed pretty regularly by the planning commission on a regular basis, so.
Okay, we'll look up statutory. Stephanie, look up statutory guidelines there, please. We ready to vote? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Pose nay?
Nay.
Okay, carried. Motion carried. And before next family night on a farm, we'll have that issue being dealt with neither a CUP or an IUP.
Large gathering.
Large gathering, yeah, which we
That's what triggers.
already have.
I believe I was the only one that had announcements.
Oh, we still got-
Oh, we still
Oh, I'm
have.
sorry. 9.1, appoint 2019 Winona County AMC delegate. This is page 159 of our packet. All right, and those are, any changes need to be made?
Well, I see that we have it listed wrong in our background, but we have it right on the AMC policy. We've got Greg Olson.
Yeah, because we've
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So
I'm on environmental.
160 is
that.
correct. Page
I'm a-
160 is correct, right?
Yeah, and then Dave Kramer's filling in on transportation and infrastructure.
Right. And then actually in January of 2019, we will have to change this.
Revisit it.
Yes, we'll have to revisit. Okay.
In case you don't get reelected.
Right, if I'm not here, if
Well, that's-
I won't
Commissioner
be here.
Pomeroy will be gone.
Yes,
and
it will need to be looked at,
It needs
yes.
to be reviewed in 2019. So Administrator
Just like-
Fritz put that on at
just like
January meeting, first meeting of January, please.
I'm
Do we
happy to
need
stay where I'm at.
Do we need to vote?
Yeah, we need to vote on,
Or just-
They're going to put it on the agenda in January.
Yeah.
Well,
but for the remainder of this year?
yeah, they want to know for this year.
This year?
And
Okay.
then if you change it, you change it.
Change it. All right, so I need a motion.
I'm comfortable with
Yeah.
They want it for 2019, but now.
second.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Olson made a motion, seconded by Commissioner Jacob, to approve the policy committees as presented on page 160. Any discussion?
On page, 160.
160. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, we are approved. All right, then, announcements. We do have our AMC District 9 meeting Monday morning in Wabasha. I think everybody should have gotten a email that included some of the policy statements that just came out. If everybody will look that over and see if there's anything there that anybody wants to add or delete or change. Appreciate a heads up on that, and I can carry that forward to that meeting. Karen isn't here to publicize our CJCC community meeting Thursday night at 7?
6.
6 at the middle school.
Specifically on the jail.
Yeah, that's a jail. It's kind of a
It's a
community
community
jail.
discussion on the jail.
Right, and
Summit.
so it's not our meeting, but there may be several of us in attending. But we'll just be listening.
Hope so.
We'll just be listening.
Light refreshments are going to be served.
Yeah.
Light refreshments. Do we have the RSVP?
No
But
RSVP.
it wasn't on our, but it wasn't on our calendar. So I got Chris's eyes and Tobias's eyes. Are we okay on that? It wasn't on our calendar, but it's not our meeting. So
If we're not participating,
yeah, we just show up. Okay, just, so we don't get ourselves in trouble. We don't need any trouble with the law or the press. All right, that's what I had. So entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
second?
Motion made by Commissioner Olson, second by Commissioner Jacob to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We're adjourned. Thank you.